Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of Memolytics. Today, we have the pleasure of having my very, very good friend Bobby here. He's also another football coach here in the United States and also a director for his club. And he's just on this journey with us on trying to figure everything out here in the football world and try to make sense of it all. Bobby, thank you for being here. And please, the floor is yours. You can introduce yourself and then introduce the topic for today.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you for having me, Memo. I know this has been in the making. I know we tried to do this back in the months of June, July last year. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. This is a much better time now. As you said, I'm also a director. I try to be a director is the best way that I can explain it. There is a lot of chaos out there in the football administration, the football management world, in the youth landscape, and hopefully through conversations like this one, we can begin to reduce the chaos in those worlds. So, without further ado, let's get underway. Principle one of the football coach evolution. Football competence is the adaptation to overload football situations. So let's just say that again. Football competence is the adaptation to overload football situations. Immediately when I read that, three things pop out to me. The first one is football competence. The second one would be the adaptation to overload. And then the third one is football situations. So I would like to start talking about the first one, which is football competence, and primarily the stages that one must travel through to arrive at football competence. Those stages would be the five stages of competence. So one example might be a player, and this is where I'm just gonna delve straight into the example here of a player who I have had the experience with, and it's actually a situation that is very similar to one that Raymond put in his book about the player who overreacts when it comes to yellow cards, or the player who doesn't know how to, not say something back to a referee, but then they end up getting a yellow card. I had a young player, 11, 12 years old. He not only had problems with referees branching cards, he not only had problems in keeping his words to himself, but he also had problems when he thought he got fouled, but the referee didn't do anything about it. That was his biggest problem. The situation that I then created was within a training session, within the match at the end of the training session. The situation that I created was I wanted this young boy to get into a 50-50 tackle. I was then going to purposely say play on just like a normal referee would have, because I wanted to test to see what his reaction would then be within that situation. Within that situation, what then happened next was the individual, he immediately started screaming and shouting straight back at me. This is the exact response that I wanted. And I don't mean to use this word because I'm going to move on to it next in the next part of this, but the situation brought out his incompetent actions, and that is what I wanted from him. A little bit later, after that, myself and this young boy, we then had a conversation. We had a conversation about why that does not benefit him and why that does not benefit the wider group. So the first part, I wanted to create a situation to bring out his unconscious incompetence. Okay, because I didn't feel like he knew what he was doing. To then arrive at the next place, can we now become consciously incompetent? Is he aware of what he is doing? The discussion about why that isn't good for him and about why that isn't good for the overall group. We went back into the next game, to the next match scenario after, and this young boy, again, I was very focused on him, making sure that if there was a moment that I could have given a foul, I didn't. I wanted to challenge him. Said play on, turned around, he looked at me, he threw his hand in the air, but he then quickly turned back around and got straight back into the game. This situation then, in my opinion, he went from being consciously incompetent, recognize hand in the air, put the hand back down, now get back onto with playing, which in my estimation of the situation, I believe that he then became consciously, in the next action, as he then moved on, there was another situation, did it again, said play on. He then got straight back into the game. So he went from very, very quickly within that one match scenario, he went very, very quickly at the end of the training session from being unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. He knew that his action was incorrect. And then as the training session drew to a close, he then arrived at being consciously competent. We then repeated this. Okay, so he had a good quality of action. We then repeated this over an increased quantity throughout every single session. I then started to implement this within every exercise that we did within the training session. And then we increased the frequency. We did it over a number of training sessions where I was always challenging the quality of his action, where I was always challenging the number that I could challenge him with within that training session. And then hopefully we can do it over 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sessions. That individual now within my environment, I would say then arrived somewhere where he was unconsciously competent because he didn't allow for the situation that I had created to bring out the former incompetent actions. He now had the next level of competent actions within that environment. This individual, because he had a much stronger, in my words, these might not be the right words here, but he had much stronger emotional stability. He was then able to progress from the team that he was on with me, and then we moved him up to the next team because he had a much greater level of control over his emotions. However, the situation is the cause, and the incompetent or the competent actions are the effect. This young boy has now arrived at a new situation. He has arrived at a new situation at a higher level. So he is now playing these games where the number of actions have gone up, the quality of actions have gone up, the intensity of the games has gone up. He is now slowly regressing again. So within that new environment, we are now having to work with him to get into that place again where he can be unconsciously competent. So that is the first part of all of this stuff that I would like to talk about within Principle 1, and that is football competence, and that is the 5 stages that an individual must work through for them to arrive within that situation, to arrive within that situation with a competent action to where they are then unconsciously competent. During all of that, I never once thought, during all of that, as the individual then came to the end of it, I spoke with him about his improvement with that one incompetent action that he had. I spoke to him about his improvement, and I wanted to ask him, what is it that now happens in your brain when the referee begins to when the referee makes a decision that you dislike? And the reason why I wanted to ask him that question was because, and this is something that Raymond would say a lot during the level 2 stuff, was how can we help players become coaches. And it's the players who are able to consciously explain what is going on unconsciously. So they then reach level 5, right? The consciously unconscious competent player. And he said something along the lines of, I just don't let it bother me anymore. It's more important that I communicate to my teammates, get back goal side behind the ball, get back into the next attack, than it is for me to allow for whatever happens with the referee to begin to affect me. So that is one example there. Football competence, the 5 stages of competence. And I just wanted to give a little bit of flesh to it all by linking it to a situation that I went through that I didn't design before. It was a situation that I was designing as I was going through it. And they were my thought processes as I was going through it. So Memo, I saw you taking a lot of notes there. Anything that you would like to chime in on or
Yeah,
zoom out on so that we can get a bigger picture of all this stuff?
yeah, it's good to always to have an example present, and it's also a dangerous thing too if you don't have the thinking tools, because sometimes you dive and zoom in straight into the example,
Yep.
and then now the tools are only useful for you instead of being a useful tool for everybody who's watching. So I'm glad you provided an example. So now before we zoom into the example, we should first zoom out and create context from how you started the conversation. So the book you're referring to is the Football Coaching Theory book, Part 1 by
Correct.
Raymond Rahim, and a book that we both would recommend every coach to read.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
And the reference you are talking about is the first coaching principle. So the how of coaching is football competence is the adaptation to overload situations. So
Correct.
now we have to break this principle up, this phrase. We have to break it up so then we understand every component of the principle. But the overall general overview is basically, if we want to improve players, what does that mean? And football competence is an integral part of that. So first, we should first talk about what is football and establish that agreement between all the coaches. And then we have to talk about what is competence, which is the second agreement, because definitions are important. And if you don't establish the definitions, then we might not be talking about the same thing as we get deeper and deeper into the conversation. And then we end up talking past each other for the next 90 minutes. So would you like to explain first what is football? And then we could talk about what is competence. And then we could talk about what it means to improve a player. And then we dive into your example.
Yeah. Football is attacking and defending. They are the 2 team functions. Within those functions, each one has a task. The attacking tasks are building up and scoring. The defending tasks are preventing the opponent's build up and then denying the opponent from scoring. And then within those tasks, there are then actions that go along with those tasks to achieve it.
Yeah.
And
so
then,
sorry, continue.
no, you go. What were you saying?
So basically, football is a game with 2 teams where one team is trying to attack and the other team has to defend. One team is trying to score goals and the other team is trying to prevent goals. And then this is done within a context. So the characteristics of the game include 2 goals, pitch, a ball, 11 players on each team, the lines of the pitch, the boundaries, and also the laws of the game.
Correct.
Without any of these things, without and how you win, the purpose of the game. So the purpose of the game is winning. How you win is scoring at least 1 more goal than the opposing team. Without these things, if you take one of these things out, then football is no longer football. So then you're doing something else. So this is the football context. So within this context, we're talking about the competence of a player within this context. So yeah, players have to contribute to attacking and defending and to the purpose of the game. And sometimes players do get emotional, as you mentioned earlier. And as coaches, we have to help them with that. So now that we've established football, what is competence? What does competence mean?
Competence is the adaptation to the new situation. As simple as that. Competence is the adaptation to the new situation, the successful adaptation to the new situation.
So okay, so competence, yeah. Competence is gaining an understanding of something, because it's one thing to recognize something. So players can play football and recognize things, but they don't fully comprehend why things are happening around them or how they affect what is happening around them. But until they fully understand, then they could perform more purposeful actions on the pitch, which will help them be more adaptable to game situations and potentially overload situations. And this is done by references provided to them, or gaining references about the game. Something like maybe a game insight principle, for example, to guide their thinking. So maybe a simple one, if you're my teammate and you're gonna play me the ball, you're gonna progress the ball to me, and I have an opponent on my right side. Ideally, you play to my left foot, so then I could keep my body between the opponent and the ball. And that would be a game insight principle. In terms of direction of passing or progressing the ball. And to zoom out even further, we can even discuss how competence is developed, because in terms of human evolution, because football players are just humans within a football context.
Correct.
Yeah. Would you like to do you know how humans developed, how our ancestors developed competence throughout their development as a human, throughout their evolution as humans?
If I did give it a go, it would be a very bad attempt at retrieving the information that is stored in my brain from the last time that I read over that chapter.
But it's okay, because this is an overload situation for you.
Correct. No, indeed.
This is a recording. It could go online. It could not. So you're under the pressure of having to explain, and maybe in front of a few people, because the YouTube channel is not that big yet. But this is an overload situation for you. So as a metaphor, can you also adapt to the overload situation? And even if your explanation is not the best explanation, then at least you go from unconsciously incompetent unconsciously competent to consciously competent. And we'll discuss the 5 stages of competencies later. But just because you have the reference
Indeed.
in your brain, I can use it to then provoke you to then explain to the best of your
So
ability.
here we go. The evolution of humans and how humans came about was from random cells, the perfect melting pot, the perfect conditions for cells to be created in a certain situation in a certain environment. One cell may have popped up, but then quickly died. And then another cell may have popped up, quickly died. Same situation. Nothing's really changing so much, right? And then one day, this one cell turns into two cells. But then those two cells vanish away very, very quickly. A couple of years later, let's say, two more cells are created. Same situation, but nothing's changing in the landscape. Everything is still the same. A couple of 100 years go by. One cell turns into two cells. Two cells turn into four cells. Four cells turn into eight. But then the eight dies. And another couple of hundred, couple of thousand years go on. And this essentially happened for millions and millions and millions of years. And what these cells needed was a change in situation. They needed the situation to change for a couple of reasons. One, the cells needed a new situation to overload them. But then secondly, the cells needed a new situation. Sorry, no, the cells needed a new situation so that they could arrive, first of all, at a stage of incompetence to then slowly figure out, right, what do we need so that our cells can actually stay here long enough? This happened over and over and over and over and over again. But nobody was intentionally changing the situation. It just happened. It was by pure chance. And that is where Raymond uses the example of street football, because street football is the melting pot of those cells and where they were. Not a lot of intentional changing of the situation. But back to the cells, this happened over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years until human beings arrived. And then we had the first version of the Homo sapien. I can't remember the correct word for it, but we had the first Homo sapien, where again, this was an individual that would see things, but they wouldn't necessarily know what it was that they saw. For example, if they saw a rustling noise from behind the trees, they would they all might run away if those Homo sapiens were in a group. Let's say that they all might run away, but they weren't yet smart enough to understand the next time that they heard a similar noise come from behind those bushes, they then ran away again. But it wasn't until one brave Homo sapien looked behind the bush to see what it was. This was where an adaptation took place within that group of Homo sapiens. They were able to recognize, this isn't something that we should be fearful of. This is actually dinner. That reference from that situation was then able to be passed on from group to group to group. And then every group now has a new reference. But from there, within that situation, the next time the situation came about, they thought it was the same noise. They would then go behind the bush to see what it was. This time it is something to be scared of. It is something to run away from. A situation that they now have to survive, a new situation. But again, all of these examples that I am giving of human evolution, they arose from situations that were not being created. They simply happened as from happenstance, from luck, from chance, whatever that you want to call it. But then come about, let's say maybe 10,000 years ago, things really then started to pick up where these individuals, these Homo sapiens, they were now beginning to create a life form where they were intentionally creating situations. They now had built up references of trust, references of danger, and it all stemmed from everything that had happened before them. So that is my explanation. Very badly put with too many words of human evolution.
I love all the examples you provided because it gives a lot of content to discuss. So just to put it in simple terms, and I like the cell example. So basically, because people might think consciousness precedes competence, but
Indeed, as did
competence
I.
precedes consciousness. So first you become competent before you can become conscious, in simple terms. And this is proven by the way our ancestors were evolving through time. Like you gave the example, even the simple example with a single cell organism. Single cell organism survived situation one and then evolved to two cell organism, but then could not survive situation two.
Yep.
These single cell organisms were not conscious of progressing to situation two from becoming single cell organism to a two cell organism. They were not conscious of this process. They just survived. It just happened, like you said. Then the two survived situation two. One of them did. This is why we get three. But then those don't survive situation three. Eventually you get lucky, and then so on and so forth. And then you get a human being. So then the human being is made up of a bunch of cells. So now these human beings early on, consciousness was not developed in the brain yet. And conscious thinking is just a function of the unconscious brain. Because so the unconscious brain is constantly in this loop of thinking, but you have a conscious thought within this loop of thinking.
Yep.
But that is later developed as humans evolved. And using your example with the rustling in the bushes, this is why we get certain genetical traits that stay with us and are very difficult to change. For example, confirmation bias. So first, we have a group of Homo sapiens, early humans. They see rustling in the bushes, and our curious scientific ancestor goes and checks it out and gets eaten. So then fear is provoked in the brain of these Homo sapiens that got lucky that they survived. So then they run away, and then their genetic pattern reproduces this confirmation bias, because the next time they hear rustling in the bushes, they're gonna run because they remember that their friend got eaten.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not even gonna try to falsify their first impression. So they have a first impression of something, very low resolution photo, and because they don't have deductive thinking, logical reasoning. They create uh, uh, confirmation bias. So, which is why when you meet someone for the first time, that is your first impression. And then the second time you meet them, you're trying to confirm your first impression rather than falsify your first impression of that person. So then you have this very low resolution photo. And it's not our fault because that is just the genetic pattern that happens. But until you become conscious of the competence that you've developed over the time, you cannot change this or you cannot manage this. And so now we have either a purposeful process to now, okay, this is my first impression. I'm going to falsify my first impression to then develop a higher resolution photo. And then I'm going to falsify that one. So then I get the best possible image and understanding of who you are as a person. So if I'm meeting you for the first time and then I meet you again and again and again, so then I could get the best possible image of you. Or I just take my first impression and I just make assumptions, and then I become very judgmental of your behavior. But then the clearer I can paint a picture of you in my brain through falsification, I can detect subtle flaws in your behavior that does not resonate with the references in my brain of you. And that again, that is developed through first being competent, so understanding, and then but being conscious of your understanding, so then you can top down guide your thinking.
Yep.
Conscious thoughts, because you're not in control of your unconscious thinking. You're just thinking, and then boom, you get a conscious thought. But then you can use that conscious thought to provoke the next thought. And then another simple example was a little ant digging a tunnel.
Yes.
And then it rains, and then that ant drowns because the tunnel is very straight. And then you get the drunk ant who digs this tunnel up and down.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck is this ant doing? He's drunk. You look at the tunnel he's digging. It's not ideal. It's not nice and straight. But then when it rains, he doesn't drown. So
He
then,
survives.
yeah. So then his genetic pattern reproduces. So then we get these ants that dig these different types of tunnels. But they're not conscious of it. They just do it. It's by chance. But until you become conscious of it, then you can top down guide the process. So then evolution is more purposeful and potentially quicker. So through this very, again, myself too, there after this very long explanation, which is why competence precedes consciousness.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then now we can discuss now the 5 stages of competencies that you introduced and that I also mentioned. So the first one is obviously unconsciously incompetent.
Yes.
Would you like to give these 5 a go?
Yeah, specific to the example that I gave, or
First, just create the general context. What are these 5 stages of competencies? And then we can use that as a tool to maybe evaluate the player's behavior that you gave the example of.
yeah, in my words, these 5 stages of competency would be the 5 stages that an an individual doesn't have to necessarily go through. They don't have to go through each of the 5 stages. Sometimes stages can be skipped. However, when it comes to coach intentionally creating a situation, we have to be aware of these 5 stages because we then might have to guide and question the player through each one of those stages to help them arrive at the end stage. That end stage used to be unconsciously competent. But as we know now, the end stage is being consciously, unconsciously competent. So that is what those 5 stages to me mean to me in my words.
Yeah, so the first one, unconsciously incompetent,
Unconsciously incompetent.
meaning you don't know what you don't know, or you're not aware of what you don't know.
Correct.
And then someone who is consciously incompetent is aware that they don't know what they don't know.
Yes.
So first, they don't know what they don't know. The next stage is, oh, yeah, I'm aware that I don't know what I don't know.
Yep.
So now the penny kind of drops for them. And then the next stage is, if they get to it, consciously competent. So now they know what they know. And let me see if the wording is correct that I used. Is aware and knows what they know. So they are aware and they also know what they know. And then unconsciously competent is they know without having to be aware. Yeah, without having to be conscious. And then the final stage is
Which I
consciously.
think was the example I would use.
What was that?
Which I think when we were trying to figure all of that out there, that was the example that I was using, jumping straight into a player who is unconsciously competent. Doesn't know what they did, but what they did was good.
Yeah. So yeah, without without consciousness, they do the right thing. But
And
maybe
then the final
they're
stage.
not aware of it. And then consciously, unconsciously competent is that they are aware of their unconscious brain.
Yeah, they are aware of what they know when they are not thinking about what they know, their unconscious brain.
So they're having this unconscious process. They are conscious of this unconscious process. And yeah. And then they know what they're doing, basically.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Which
would we then say that that conscious, unconscious competence is recognized through an individual being able to explain?
that too. That too. And this this tool will be very useful for when we're discussing the player in a few moments. So with all the tools that we just created, we can now use to proceed with the conversation. But first is because as coaches we want to improve players. So then as the principal says. So what does improving a player mean? And like you said, it's the adapting to overload football situations. And so overload is discomfort because
Yep.
being overloaded is not something that's pleasant. But sometimes as coaches, when players and even parents, when players or children are going through discomfort, our first instinct is to take away the discomfort. So then these players never learn to adapt to overload situations during training, and then in the match they struggle. So in the match, they're forced to play against an opponent who's going to try to take the ball away from them. But in training, oh yeah, he has maybe as a coach you think he has bad technique, so you do isolated training to improve
Yep.
technique. So then you underload the player, and then on match day, overload because now he has to deal with something that is moving and that is working against him, and he didn't experience that in training. So he never learns to adapt. So this discomfort, without discomfort, without overload, players have nothing to adapt to, and therefore you cannot improve the player. And overload football situations basically just means less space and time.
Yes, and that was a missing component from what I said with the space and time piece. That is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because overload football situations. Again, this is why definitions have consequences, because we just probably provoked a lot of individual coaches, individual technique coaches, who think they have good intentions. They have good intentions to help the player, but without these quality references, so a low resolution photo, as we discussed, and their falsification of their first impression. Why did the player fail? Is it bad technique, or is it a symptom of something else? So without this deductive thinking and logical reasoning, you cannot get the best explanation of the football problem. So then you create maybe not the best possible solution to help the player. So then you underload the player, and then in the match they struggle the same. So yeah, maybe we potentially might trigger a lot of isolated technical coaches or alone coaches who make a living off of this, and might get defensive. And again, it's not our intention to point anyone out. We're just trying to create clarity and tools to help coaches have better thinking tools to then help their players improve and create better situations or training environments to help these players adapt to overload situations, so then we can improve the player even better. So hopefully coaches can now reflect, especially if team coaches are also doing isolated training. Hopefully these coaches can reflect and falsify their first impression or falsify their training session, because another good example is if the players can play 10v0, 10v1, why would you play 5 versus 0? Why would you take the opponent away? If 10 versus 1 is an unrealistic exercise, or even 5 versus 1 is an unrealistic exercise, 5v0 is even more unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
So why do coaches resort to that? So again, with this definition of improving a player means adapting to overload football situations, with this definition, it has consequences to how coaches think now.
And I think that space and time piece is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Overload comes from an individual adapting to the situation because of having less space and time.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that again and emphasizing it. And it should also be said that coaches might think that they improve players, but coaches cannot improve a player by definition. You can only help players improve, because it's the responsibility of the player, because he has to perform the action. But also, players cannot improve themselves by definition, because they also rely on their teammates. They rely on the opponent to provide that overload situation, that less space and time for them to adapt to. So if a teammate at training is training at 80%, there's no overload situation. So then players cannot improve themselves by definition. They rely on the football situation.
Yep.
Which includes the opponent and opposing team.
And I think the way to sum that up nicely is players overload players.
Mm-hmm. Players overload players. And just like, and with that also, that as a metaphor, coaches overload coaches.
Indeed.
So if you're not surrounded with better coaches or coaches who have a higher level of thinking, you're going to stay stuck in your loop of thinking and you're not going to evolve and you're not going to improve as a coach. So that player example, players overload players, is also a nice metaphor for coaches, because we have an opinion about our players when they do not perform at 100%, or they're trying to push them from 100% to 101%, but we don't do the same for ourselves as coaches. So then you don't practice what you preach. So this was a nice little detour to give a nice message to coaches to reflect on their coach actions and behaviors. And then now we can now that the context has been created, we can now dive into your specific example of the emotional player. So this player is emotional because the referee triggers something in their brain.
Yes.
And they don't think action anymore. They don't think task. They think, oh, they give an emotional response, and then they start thinking blaming referee and not transition.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And it would be, and it's interesting, because now you because you earlier you said your opinion, but I don't. Opinion is not the best word. Through your logical reasoning, you concluded this. Through your logical reasoning, you concluded this is not your opinion. You're able to substantiate why you think this, and so it'd be nice to use the coach action reference to understand the process between you and the player and how you improved him through a top-down process and guided him through an improved action or improved behavior. But then now with a new environment, how his behavior went backwards again. And we have to try to reason why that happened as well. So look again, the coach action reference, or actually I never presented the coach action reference yet on this any of the video series. So a coach action is the same as a player action, which we have introduced in the series. So a coach action is also communicating, deciding, and executing decision. And communicating. So a coach action has two parts in the communicating phase, which is describing and explaining. So and then deciding what. So deciding is broken down into two parts, because first you have to decide what you're going to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and then you have to decide how you're going to do it, which is your design. And then you have to execute your design. So your first part, describing, let's go through that again. So describe the situation again.
And the situation, young 12-year-old boy has a consistent problem when when he feels like he has been fouled and the referee does not award a foul against the opposition in favor of him.
So okay, the player is playing. He maybe gets contact from his direct opponent. He thinks it's a foul, but the referee says play on. Correct. And then rather than playing on, he immediately gets emotional at the referee. So now he stops playing football.
Correct.
And what is your explanation to this description?
My explanation for why this individual is like this, or my explanation behind why that was my description?
No, your explanation to why did the player behave in this way?
My explanation of why the individual behaved in this way was because I felt like the individual was going through a period of their life where they were pushing back against those who were in positions of authority. And because of that, this was just another authority figure in their life. And rather than focusing on the authority figure, I wanted them to begin to focus again on thinking action, think next action, etc. That was what I thought in that situation. That was my explanation for it at the time.
You said you said you felt
I thought, I thought that.
how can we get a better explanation so we can be absolutely sure that this player has a problem with authority figures?
And I'm reflecting now, and I'm reflecting even more so on what the conversation was with this individual player
Boom, right
at
there,
this
stop,
time.
right there. So to get a very good explanation, because you can describe what happens on the pitch by yourself, but in order to explain why this happened, you need the help of the player
Correct.
because you don't know what's happening in the brain of the player. You can only make assumptions, which is what many coaches do. They assume that the problem is happens because of XYZ, and then maybe that is not the real explanation for it, but then they end up designing a solution that may not be uh, helping improve the problem, but only fighting a symptom of the problem.
Right.
So then you need to discuss this with the player because yeah, we can all have opinions on the player, but only the player knows why he reacts this way. So you have to dive into his unconscious brain and provoke those answers to come out of his mouth. So how did you do that?
And that right there, what I was reflecting on regarding the conversations of when I was asking him, hey, why do you do that consistently? And I cannot remember what he said. And I think I can't remember what he said because it was probably something as simple as, in his opinion, I think that is a foul. I always think that is a foul. Versus the referee didn't blow his whistle, can't be foul, next action.
And do you remember the questions you asked this player?
I do not. I do not. I'm drawing a blank.
That's all right.
I think in the moment, knowing me, the questions were probably very direct and to the point to get to the answer of what was going on, resulting in me recognizing, no, this cannot happen any longer. We're going to make a change right now. At the end of that training session, that's when my wheels started turning, and I started to think about what situation can I design? How can I use the tools that I'm learning? And what situation can I design to so that I can benefit from the situation by using my tools, but also help this player get on a better path.
And just to pause for a brief moment, I hope everyone can understand what is going on here, because it's very rare that we see the coach action process in a conscious, in I think, for lack of a better words, a conscious environment or a conscious process, because we do these things unconsciously all the time.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's the problem. Okay, that's the explanation. But without going through this hierarchy consciously, step by step, because you just go problem, solution, problem, solution. And so the fact that we're going boom, step by step, it's we can now more use this coach action reference as a tool to help purposefully guide our coach actions in a more purposeful way, versus just jumping from problem solution.
Yep.
As the fact that we pulled out asking the player is a vital part of the explanation of the description, or the explanation of the problem, is a problem, is a it's an important piece, because I don't know how many coaches take their first impression again. Oh, I see something, and now I have a first impression, and I'm gonna go based on my first impression, versus trying to falsify their first impression and finding ways to falsify their first impression. For, like, again, asking the player, uh, checking if what you see is the same thing that they saw, and then asking questions to better understand why their behavior was their behavior during that game situation. So that was just I just wanted to point that out. But I think it's very important to make people aware and conscious of what is happening, because you could get lost in the conversation.
And one thing that I'm reflecting on right now, Memo, as we discussed through this, is the level of unconsciousness that I was experiencing during that situation. For me to not this stage, that stage, that stage, that stage, for me to be like, young man, what's going on here? Why are you always like this? Etc., and just moving through it in the immediate phase as problem solution, in the immediate phase. But then at the end of the training session, stepping back, right, what are these tools that I'm learning here? What are they? What is the tool that I can use? Situation coaching.
Mhm.
Zooming out, taking a step back, and then having that approach versus the approach that I was having in the immediate phase of it all.
You just gave me a nice little pop-up to use later, because why you chose what you chose is also another interesting process within itself, but we'll get to that. I don't
Yep.
want to.
Absolutely. Make a note of it.
I already did. Yeah. Because now I get excited about that part, because it's interesting to hear coach's reasoning, but we'll get to it. I don't want to jump ahead. But the questions you ask the player could provoke different responses in the brain of the player, which is why I ask, what questions did you ask? Because then we can evaluate your questions and then maybe improve your questions for later. Yeah, so if you don't remember the questions, we can't provide feedback to those questions, because the one question that you did mention is young man, why are you behaving this way?
Yeah, it would have been something very much like that.
Okay, because if to someone it might feel very judgmental, And if you present the question as if you're judging somebody, so they could put their heels in the ground,
Mhm.
and now they get defensive. So now you don't get so now their amygdala is triggered. So now you're fighting against the player instead of having a calm conversation where you create this safe environment where the players free to express themselves, and now you get the most honest answers from the player because now his amygdala is deactivated, and now he's just unconsciously just answering the questions versus, oh, coach is judging me, I'm gonna get defensive, and I'm gonna protect myself, so you don't get the most honest answers, so you don't get the most honest explanation. What are your thoughts on what I just said?
Yeah, really good. I'm thinking now, what would the new question be if I could be in that situation all over again, based upon what we're currently talking about? And I'm thinking that the question would be something along the lines of, player, can you tell me what just happened there?
Could you also do you have a video clip? Do you have a video clip?
No, this was very much in the moment, me cataloging this is becoming a problem now.
So now you recognize the pattern.
Yep.
Okay. So then the that time you wanted to address it. Um, would it not be better to pull the player and say, hey, do you recall the moments when you reacted towards the referee? Can you describe what you did?
Hmm.
Lines. How
Yeah.
did you react? Or how did hey, remember when the referee didn't blow the whistle for you? How did you react? Oh yeah, the referee, blah 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 blah. Yeah, I threw my hand up, whatever, whatever. I got mad. Hmm. And then you ask the following, whatever the following question you want to ask, and why and why did this bother you so much? Because blah 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 blah. Maybe, and then you eventually ask deeper, but you ask deeper questions based on the player's answers. So you
Right.
take the player's answers as a stepping stone for your next question. So now you keep him in this flow state, and he's just gonna spill out what his unconscious brain wants to vent out to you. So at this point, he's vulnerable, which is what you want. So yeah, you take his response as a stepping stone for your next question, and then that response because there's no arguing because that is what he said. You can't judge him because he literally just said what he just said.
Yep.
So this is a way to avoid confrontation with the player. Mhm. So then,
Yeah, I like it. Definite improvement.
yeah. So now with this, you can now gain more insights of what occurred. So now you can come up with a conclusion or an explanation, and so then you develop a hypothesis, a hypothetical solution, your intention as a coach. What was your hypothetical solution?
When I was trying to decide what I was going to do,
Mhm.
immediately I thought about what am I currently learning that can help this individual right now? What are the tools of the things that I'm currently learning? Pop up situation coaching.
But that is deciding how. So what is the deciding what? What was your deciding what?
create the situation.
So you want to maybe, so description was player reacts emotionally to referee. Explanation, player has a button in his brain, blah blah blah. He gets triggered for when things don't go his way. He gets triggered. Hypothetical solution potentially is helping this player deactivate or manage this unconscious button. So then he can think task and not referee.
Yep.
You're deciding what, how you do it. You have situation coaching or you have reference coaching. And then you chose situation coaching.
Yes.
And now I do the full stop again because it's the interesting part. Because coaches just choose solutions without any logical explanation. What is your logical explanation behind situation coaching and not reference coaching? So basically, your choices have pros and cons. Why did the pros outweigh the cons of situation coaching, and why did the cons outweigh the pros of reference coaching? So then which is why you selected situation coaching.
I think it was two things. The first was the way that I was interpreting what I was reading was that the situation, if created optimally, let's say, would be able to teach the player more than a reference from me could. So that was the first part. The second part was then a personal challenge of how I probably wanted it to be a design situation that would then allow for this individual to recognize and to learn and to then improve from.
One second, because this is very interesting as well, and I think it's gonna be a very impactful tool.
Yes.
Okay. So, you chose situation coaching because through logical reasoning, you concluded that it will have a greater impact on the player in terms of them recognizing their behavior. So basically, you're putting the mirror in front of them, which has a lot more meaning than you giving the player a lecture, which goes to the reference of experiencing versus explaining.
Yep.
So it's like you tell a teenager, hey, if you ride that skateboard in that way, you are going to scrape your knee. And the teenager's like, what are you talking about? So he does it anyways.
Scrapes his knee.
Versus you allow the teenager to ride the skateboard in that way, he scrapes his knee, unfortunately. But then you can use the situation to top-down guide his behavior to then provoke a better behavior, because now him experiencing riding the skateboard in that way, now your words have more meaning to the player because they've experienced it, versus you just lecturing and then it goes in one ear and out the other. And then I get the next reference is why does this occur? If a player has a bare brain, so they don't have the references stored in their brain, they don't have the thinking tools to understand your reference coaching. So with a bare brain, with no references, You cannot reference coach because you cannot activate references that are not there, which is why it has no meaning for them. So without the references being first established or downloaded in the brain of the player, reference coaching becomes impossible. So you have to situation coach, which is
Yep.
why your solution is perfect for this player because he is incompetent.
Via luck, it was selected correctly. Yes.
And I commend you on how honest you are.
It's part of the process for everybody to go through as they're trying to navigate through this stuff and learn. You have to put it into practice based upon how you are interpreting it. And then on the back of it, have conversations like this about how you applied it to then get greater clarification on it so that I'm already thinking right now and visualizing the next time something happens, right here, 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 here. Is that good? Through logical reasoning, what is the reasons why I have decided to do it in this way? Am I good with that? Yeah. And then have a conversation with somebody about how I decided to go about it. Because this right now, this has helped me more than the pat on the back that I gave myself after I designed that situation.
That's very interesting too. Yeah, because without, like I said, coaches overload coaches,
Yep.
players overload players, and through conversations like this, we probably develop a new thinking tool, or the thinking tool was already there in your brain. You just didn't know how to explain it. It's already stored in your brain, but I'm able to activate it. So now next time you're because you're already competent, but now I make you more conscious of your competence. So now you
Yes.
can more purposefully use it for your next coach action.
Yes.
So you do deserve the pat on the back.
Half a pat.
Ah, there you go. You do
And
deserve it.
somewhat. Primarily, though, to do with the several of of several of the pieces that happened during all that, and simply being unconscious of it, doing unconscious of it, not necessarily being conscious of what I was saying because I was not going about it in a step-by-step approach. Because problem, solution, problem, solution. That was the mindset in that situation. I was just lucky that I had some of these tools.
Mindsets or brain state.
Brain state. Thank you for catching me on that one.
Yeah, the mental triggers me very quickly.
Yeah, no, it was. I had a conversation about it with somebody the other day, and
That's
it's funny how I still even get caught up on it.
that's another video I want to produce later, and maybe you can join in on that conversation because maybe I would like to have maybe a panel, and we falsify the traditional football reference: technical, tactical, physical, mental,
Yep.
logical sequence. So that's a later video, which might be probably probably one of the most impactful videos that are going to be on this YouTube page. But anyways, disregarding that, um, I know we have like 7 minutes left on the clock. So I think we can pause here because I'm sure we're going to want to do another meeting. And
It seems like we might have to do another two.
I'm more than fine with that because you know what? We have uh five more principles to discuss, but we're still on principle one.
Yep.
I'm sure.
And I'm really happy that we will probably have another two because the notes that I have put down from everything that has been said, this last 90 minutes interaction with you has been so valuable for me. And I just want to re-emphasize the point that without conversations like this, it's very difficult for it's very difficult for coaches to really reflect on what they are doing and why they are doing it. So this is, I hope, and I know Raymond spoke about this in the past as well when it comes to mentorship, etc. I hope that this has been worthwhile for you just as much as it has been for me, because this has been for me, Memo, exactly what I have needed, and I thank you for asking me to do this.
Oh, of course. No, that brings me a lot of joy just hearing that. No, I agree. Through conversation, we can help improve each other's thinking, because you provoke a conscious thought in my brain and you get me out of my loop of thinking, which then now I trigger a conscious thought in your brain and it gets you out of your loop of thinking, and then we evolve the references, or we gain a better understanding of the references. And because our brain, the references are like the holes of a sift. So
Yeah.
like the baking tool, like you're sifting flour. The more fine-tuned your references, the smaller the holes in your sift. So then less bigger problems seep through. So then you can immediately identify something.
Yep.
And these little flaws come out, and you can identify even the smallest flaw. So less gets by you, and you can identify even the smallest flaw because of how fine-tuned your references are. And I think that's very powerful as a coach, which is why coaching is a knowledge profession and not an experience profession. And yeah, no, this conversation was very, very enjoyable throughout the entire 90 minutes. And I remember in the beginning, before we hit record, you mentioned that you had a plan, that you wanted to discuss all of this, and you were that this might provoke this, and this might jump over here, which is what you want to talk about, but then this might trigger this, and then it comes back over here. So my question to you is, did this conversation go as you had planned?
No, no whatsoever. No whatsoever. And that's the beauty of all of this is that it didn't go to plan. Because by it not going to plan and you reintroducing how to go through things with the context of the situation first, then going through things with the reference, identifying the pieces of the reference, and then introducing the example, it wouldn't have stuck with me as good as it should have done, if that makes sense. So by it not going to plan, it is the situation has acted like the best learning tool out there.
So I also did situation coaching.
Correct. Correct.
And a little bit of reference coaching.
Yes.
Wow, very good, Bobby. And final reflections before we have to sign off.
Final reflections. My final reflections are primarily for me when we next do this, with how I bring forward the information that I am bringing forward in the order that I am doing it, so that it is just as clear as the way that you went through it after I had gone through my own situation, the reasons why I did what I did. That is huge. The details as well, the details of the way of going about that. And also, when I do bring forward another example, because I think the example is really important here, after we have built the picture for everybody of the context and the reference, improving my description of everything per a process like the coach action, and making sure that I can deliver what went through that without having been asked questions with that situation, if that makes sense. I know why you're asking the questions. You're asking the questions to get them out of me because that information is valuable, but also I need to be able to bring that information to the forefront as well, which then helps my own thinking.
Yeah, just providing context and clarity through definitions and agreements
Yep,
catalyzes the process.
it does.
Yeah, because we could have just went straight into the example, and the conversation probably wouldn't be as high of a quality as we just had without these definitions, agreements, and establishing the context first.
Agreed. And I just wrote that
Gives
down
us a
there.
starting point.
It does. But the context and clarity through definitions catalyzes the process. And I think that is the best way to sum up my reflection of this last 90 minutes. And I think that's really powerful.
Fantastic. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for this conversation. It's probably been one of my favorites that I've had in a while.
Good.
I thank you for that. And
My pleasure. It was all my pleasure.
best of luck with your coaching and with your club. And
Thank you.
we will hopefully speak again very, very soon because we still have to finish your coach action process.
We do indeed. Thank you very much, Memo. It's
All
been
right,
a pleasure.
Bobby. Take care.